For example, in 2016, the race for president was more about, was it ABC or ABD? Anybody ever heard this one? Oh, good. I get to teach something new. Anyone but Clinton, ABC, or anyone but the Donald. And it turns out ABC was the one that won out, anyone but Clinton. In the race for Kansas governor, I think there's one ad that really sealed Laura Kelly's election. That when people saw that, that was it. And it was based on a moment in one of the gubernatorial debates that was on Channel 3. And you hear the reporter for Channel 3 asking the question, who thinks Sam Brownback was a good governor? And then they pan Greg Orman and Chris Kobach and Laura Kelly, and Chris Kobach raises his hand. And the narrator says, that's all you need to know. Anybody remember that one? Yeah, right? I mean, that's not projecting, here's what I want to do, here's my agenda. It's, I don't want you to vote for the guy who likes that guy. Very, very anti and running against rather than running for. Well, and this is nothing new. I mean, this has gone on for the ages. Even in the time of Jesus, this rule still applied, that you maintain power and authority by being against something rather than for something. So let me provide some context to this and how that all fits into the fourth verse of Silent Night. And it begins with a little history. So the ascension of Julius Caesar to the throne in Rome ushered in an era of peace. It ushered in prosperity for the Roman coffers that had evaded and eluded the Roman Empire. Oh, sure, there was money, but Rome really grew economically and in power under Julius Caesar. Right? He built roads. He built water systems. Right? In fact, you can still go through parts of Europe and still see the water systems and the conduits and the pipelines and stuff that he built or had built. He consolidated the military. Very importantly, he improved the tax collection system so that the taxes that were collected actually made it to Rome rather than into the pockets of people along the way, although that still did happen. And he brought calm to the borders of the empire. Always very, very important to make sure that your flank essentially is covered in a military sense. As such, it's really the golden age of the Roman Empire. And historians even give it a name. They call it Pax Romania. I had to practice that. Or the Peace of Rome. If you were a Roman citizen at the time, any report of dissension or a revolt in one of the corners, the far-reach corners of the empire, maybe like this little place that we know as Palestine, the Romans named it Judea. Well, that would be considered ungrateful, and no mercy would be shown in crushing you. I have to give my Kevin O'Leary here. Crushing you like the cockroaches that you are. Right? Or Darth Vader, right? Think of Darth Vader in that same sense, right? That you are part of a rebel alliance, right? And we're going to crush you, right? So that would have been the response of the Roman Empire. That was the narrative that they wanted out in every inch and corner of the empire. How peaceful things were, how great Rome was. You know, look at this new sand road that you're getting through this mountain pass. You now have access to water that you didn't have before. all of those things. Anything that might have been a little negative about Rome, well, that would have been called what we call today fake news. And it would have been crushed. So imagine yourself a non-Roman citizen in this time. Perhaps a Jew even. Just going to go there. One more, and you're living in Judea. I don't know, is there anybody famous like that? All right, some people are still listening. Okay. So while Rome was flourishing, it came at the expense of those people, the non-citizens, the ones living outside of the main Roman Empire. And they used their taxing authority in not an economic way, but in a political way. Taxes were heavy in areas that the Romans felt could possibly rebel. And the reason is simple. If we tax you and we take your money, you can't afford to purchase arms and other things you would need for a rebellion. So we'll just take it instead. Just being nice. Helping you out. So, the American revolutionaries were not the first ones to complain about the issue of no taxation without representation. It goes way back, even into the time when Caesar would put his sandal on their throats. So how did the Romans know how much to tax? It's a good question. Well, easy. They'd take a census. Got to find out how many people are there, and then you know what to tax. So the whole purpose of the census, like the one at the start of Jesus' birth story in chapter 2 of Luke, was for the purpose of the empire to count the heads in that area to know how punishing to tax that area. Isn't that nice? You might feel like that ourselves, don't we, at times, especially on April 15th. Sorry, Nancy. So in this time, if you think about the time in which Jesus was born, while the census was being undertaken, and it's not a secret, the people know why they're being counted, they would have been looking for relief, for a way out of the empire. I mean, one of the things that the backlash of a census was rebellion. So there would be extra troops sent in and garrisons established to make sure that everybody was counted. And then the military presence would be pretty hard-handed during this time. So the Jews would have been asking about and longing for those good old days, right back when King David reigned, those good old days. And coupled with that would have been kind of the actual fear itself that rebellion could break out. Because there were people, they're called the Zealots, if you've ever heard that term, who actively fought for rebellion. And the Jews were the only successful rebellion against the Roman Empire to this point under Julius Maccabeus. You can Google that when you get home. So there would have been a huge tension going on between the Jews and the Romans, and really even amongst the Jews themselves, of do we succumb and submit to the Romans, or do we just say, no, let's have it out and just let God figure it out later. But so one thing is for sure is that it definitely wouldn't have been a silent night. It's interesting that the fourth verse of Silent Night actually fast forwards through. I'm going the wrong way here. Hold on. that the fourth verse, there it is. Oh, that kind of doesn't bleed through very well. Is fast forwarding through the birth story itself, right? Where it says, Jesus, Lord, at thy birth. It's already beyond that. In fact, I think it really comes from Matthew's gospel first. In Matthew, as Wayne read the story of the Magi's visit, Matthew puts Jesus' kingship, being Lord at thy birth, right up front. There's just no question for Matthew that Jesus is the king, the long-promised king. The Magi's are depicted as kings themselves. Right? We sing about we three kings. Right? When they visit Herod and ask Herod for directions, it can't be too wise if they're asking another man for directions, I'm thinking, but that's okay. So, but anyway, so they are depicted by Herod. He treats them as equals. Right? Herod greets them rather than a staff person. They're monarchs. They're right. When the kids dress up for these, what do they have on their heads? Crowns. Right? So the Magi are equal to Herod. And here's the thing, is that they're not looking for the king to run against Herod. They're looking for a king that's possibly the next after Herod, after he dies. Herod, though, hears it very differently. Right? He hears an against ad. Right? That this new king that's been born ain't going to take my place. And the best defense is a good offense, right? So he like Darth Vader, wants to destroy his enemies. And this new king is already an enemy. And so Matthew tells us in verse 16 of chapter 2 that we have all the male babies born that are 2 and under are slaughtered. That's kingship. I mean, Jesus is really seen as an existential threat from his birth in Matthew's gospel to the political powers that be, even though that was not God's intent. But we'll get there. Both gospel writers, Matthew and Luke, write of Jesus' birth as an assault on Roman authority. Matthew, as shown here, really does it pretty upfront and pretty bluntly when you think about it. Luke, on the other hand, well, Luke is a Roman citizen. He's a Gentile. And so he kind of has a heart for the Pax Romana. He's not necessarily against that, because that's who he is. Luke is more interested in that same sense, that who is Jesus, not what Jesus is not. And so he takes more indirect swipes at Rome and at Caesar, and he wants to emphasize the contrast of what Caesar's kingdom looks like versus what Jesus' kingdom looks like. Maybe for the best way to do that is, let's take a look at the Magnificat, Mary's song of praise. Right, when she goes and she's at Elizabeth's and she's greeted, and this is how she is welcomed, right, where she says, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has looked with favor on the loneliness of his servant. Surely now all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. And it goes on. What I've done here, if you're in the sanctuary, you can see some of those words are in yellow and some are in white. So what I have done is I've highlighted the words that would have been an affront to Caesar in this. She's not calling Caesar Lord. She's calling God Lord. She is telling Martha that she's a servant of the Lord, not a servant of Caesar. And only in the Roman Empire, who was blessed? Not Mary. Would have been Caesar was blessed and a mighty one. So she's taking all these attributes that typically would be reserved for the emperor and placing them to God. See how subtle this is? Aren't you excited? All right. Don't ask, don't tell. So Luke's literary approach is still kind of sticking his thumb at Caesar, but not done in a confrontational way. Because he's balancing, too, his Gentile audience that he's writing. Because remember, he's a co-traveler with Paul, so they're out into the Gentile world. And they would know these code words and in the way that it's written in the Greek a lot better than how it all translates into the English. So in some ways, what Luke's approach does is really more closely aligned with Jesus' own ministry. Right? Jesus, outside of the turning the tables over in the temple, doesn't really threaten authority at all. Because he's not interested in earthly authority. Right? As he says before Pilate, my kingdom is not of this earth. If it were, right, the angels would come down and rescue him. One thing is certain about Mary's statement and her song of praise is this. She doesn't use any possible language, right? It's uncertain language. It's all certain. He has done this. He is doing this. I am his servant. She never tries to wiggle out on a might or a could. It's all is language. And when the angel, in fact, even when the angel comes and visits Mary, even in that sense, she is telling us that the king that will come, that she will give birth to, it's not going to be like Caesar. Right? In fact, this king is the king that lifts up the lowly, who fills the hungry with good things and is filled with mercy, none of which Caesar would have been interested in. In fact, even calling Jesus, one of the names that Isaiah, what we read in the Isaiah passage is, he will be known as the Prince of Peace, right? The Prince of Peace. Well, guess what the nickname of Caesar was? The Prince of Peace, right? Pax Romania, the Prince of Peace. And this is even how subtle it plays out in the early Christian communities, back when it was illegal and you could be sentenced to death for believing in Jesus. Let me show you one visual. All right, come on. There we go, maybe. So the word for peace in Roman is that. And an early Christian symbol for Jesus is that. Can you see that confrontation there and the subtlety of it? That they are usurping what is known as the greatest leader in all the world and saying, this one. Maybe you've seen that in churches, or a lot of times it's on the paraments and stuff around churches. And so, the Jews were looking for a sign of bringing liberation from Rome. That's what they longed for. And they would have looked to the powerful of Rome, or the powerful of the Jews. But God does the unexpected and instead uses a couple with a so-so reputation in a nowhere town with the least powerful person of all humans, a baby. Not even one born in the expected place or in a respectable place to bring about the contrast of earthly power to divine power. Since we've been talking about contrast to power, let me add one last one. The fourth Sunday of Advent is about hope. Hope. It's a strange word these days. Hope is not the word that I would use to describe the Jews at the time of Jesus' birth. They were pretty hopeless. Rather, I'd use the word fear. They were fearful of Rome. They were fearful of being taken into captivity again. They were fearful of displeasing God, and thus their strict adherence to all of the law. Herod is full of fear. Right? When he hears the Magi, he is overcome not by hope, but by fear. The fear of losing his grip on power, perhaps being recalled to Rome, the fear of what these strange Jewish people might do to rebel again. When you reign through fear, you live by fear. An anonymous author wrote, "If people can't access their hope, they live by their fear." And one thing about tyranny and oppression is that fear has to reign on both sides for it to work. Those who study toxicology, the study of toxic things, speak in terms of a toxin's half-life. A lot of times we hear about that with nuclear waste. It's maybe not a bad analogy, right? The shorter the half-life, the more quickly the toxic power has. Fear has a short half-life. So to keep it potent, one must continually feed into fear. So you create new fears, new worries, new enemies, new prejudices, new situations in which to feed the fear. And the thing about fear, though, is that I think it really has some meaning. I think it's false evidence appearing real. And that's the good news of the fourth verse of Silent Night and the birth of Jesus. That through the birth of Jesus, we can live in hope rather than in fear. That's worth singing about. Which is why I love the hymn on Christmas Eve. It ends with the message that Jesus is Lord at thy birth. So tomorrow night, if it's here or wherever it is that you're worshiping, or if it's on the radio, in the fourth verse, I always raise my candle up high as that reminder of, yes, my authority is with God, not with any man-made institution. So let me close with this thought. What does the world, our country, our state, our families, our youth, our poor, our schools need more of today? Do they need more hope, or do they need more fear? Right? what are most human institutions spreading? Hope or fear? So into this void of hope, I think is where the church and the conversation of the church needs to be. Right? It's the only human institution with hope, if we use it. And sometimes we're not too good about using it. We get caught up in the fear too, where it's a human institution. Right? The gospel means good news for a reason. It is the hope. Jesus is the hope for the world. So let's dedicate ourselves at this time to being planters of hope in the realm of our influence, whatever that is. And to not spread fear into our homes, through our talk, through our gossip. Although I did hear a good one. Oh no. Through social media or any other means. The fruit you bear comes from the seeds you plant. So followers of Jesus need to be in the hope spreading business rather than the manure spreading business. And that's probably about as prophetic as I'm going to get in 2018, I promise you, right? So as the ushers and the acolyte comes forward to receive this morning's offering, I want us to be reminded of the power of our hymn. I have to give credit to Abby for this. She reminded me of this verse 4 of This Is My Father's World. And if you need a break from Christmas hymns and Christmas music, maybe this is a song to do that with. So I'd invite ushers and acolyte forward, and let's just say this together as they come up. This is my Father's world. Oh, let me never forget that though the wrong seems oft so strong, God is the ruler yet. See, my wife is worth her weight in gold, I'm telling you. Let's pray. God, indeed, we can look at the newspaper or online or on the television and just see all of the ways in which our current fears are being stoked. Yet in this season, particularly in these next few days, God, give us the strength to be spreaders of hope. In spite of maybe the goading of relatives over the table or the conversations, let us be strong and be bold in our proclamation that you are King. You are Lord at thy birth. So bless now the offering to which we come to receive, as well as the offering that we give each and every day through our words and our deeds and our talents, in using our eyes and our ears, so all can be an offering to you.